The rain hammered against my black umbrella like angry fists, each drop a reminder that some storms never end. They just find new ways to destroy everything you thought you knew about the people you love. I stood there, watching them lower my sister's empty coffin into the muddy ground, when my phone buzzed. I'm alive. Don't trust anyone, not even Mom and Dad. Meet me tonight at the old pier. Come alone. L. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone into the grave. Layla, my sister, my twin, the person whose body they couldn't find after the yacht explosion 3 days ago. Around me, mourners dabbed their eyes with tissues, their whispered condolences floating through the October air like ghosts. But all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out everything except one impossible thought. If Layla's alive, then everything I believe about that night is a lie. Let me back up. My name is Maya Chun, and 3 days ago, my world exploded along with my sister's yacht off the coast of Marina del Rey. At least, that's what everyone wants me to believe. The official story goes like this. Layla took her new yacht out for an evening cruise. Alone, which was already suspicious because Layla hated being alone on the water. She'd always drag me or someone else along, claiming the ocean made her feel too small, too vulnerable. Around midnight, the Coast Guard received a distress signal. By the time they reached the coordinates, all they found were scattered debris and an oil slick that stretched across the dark water like spilled blood. No body, no survivors, just fragments of life that apparently ended in fire and salt water. But that text changes everything. I glanced around the cemetery, studying the faces of everyone who came to mourn my sister. My parents stood closest to the grave, my mother's designer black dress untouched by rain thanks to the umbrella my father held over her perfectly styled hair. Even in grief, appearance mattered to them. It always had. My father's business associates clustered nearby, their expensive suits and fake sympathy making my skin crawl. These were the same men who tried to convince Layla to sell her inheritance after her husband Adrian died last year. The same men who suddenly became very interested in our family when Layla became worth millions overnight. Something was wrong with this picture. It had been wrong from the moment I got the call about the explosion. The funeral director approached, his voice soft and professional. Miss Chun, we're ready to conclude the service whenever you are. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. If Layla was alive, if she was hiding, there had to be a reason. A terrible, dangerous reason that involved the very people surrounding her grave with crocodile tears and hidden agendas. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a hand on my shoulder, my mother's manicured fingers, cold even through my coat. Maya, sweetheart, you should come stay with us for a few days. You shouldn't be alone right now. I looked into her eyes, the same dark brown as mine and Layla's, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if I was looking at a stranger, or worse, an enemy. I'm fine, Mom. I just need some time to process. She squeezed my shoulder tighter. Nonsense. Family sticks together, especially during times like these. Besides, there are some important matters we need to discuss about Layla's estate. And there it was, the real reason for the sudden maternal concern. I pulled away gently but firmly. I said I'm fine. Before she could argue, I walked away, leaving my parents and their circle of vultures to whatever scheme they were hatching. The rain had intensified, turning the cemetery paths into rivers of mud and regret. But as I reached my car, one thought burned through the chaos in my mind. Tonight at the pier. Come alone. If you're still listening to this story, I need you to understand something. Creating these videos takes countless hours. Researching, writing, editing, perfecting every detail to bring you the most gripping stories possible. If this story has already hooked you, if you're wondering whether Layla is really alive and what dark secrets are about to unfold, then please take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but means everything to creators like me who pour their hearts into bringing you these psychological journeys. Because trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and how far people will go for money. To understand why that text message shattered my world, you need to understand what Layla meant to me. And to understand that, I need to take you back to where our story really began, in a house that looked perfect from the outside, but was rotting from within. We grew up in Westchester, in one of those sprawling suburban neighborhoods where every lawn was perfectly manicured, and every family had secrets they'd die to protect. Our house was the biggest on the block, a testament to my father's success as a real estate developer and my mother's talent for spending his money. But behind those pristine white walls, our childhood was a masterclass in emotional neglect disguised as privilege. My parents, Richard and Susan Chun, were what you might call functional sociopaths. They provided everything a child could need: food, shelter, clothes, the best schools money could buy. But they forgot to provide the one thing that actually matters: love. My earliest memory isn't of birthday parties or bedtime stories. It's of being 4 years old, cried because I'd scraped my knee on the playground, and my mother telling me to stop being so dramatic because the neighbors might hear. Layla was born just 18 minutes after me, but those 18 minutes might as well have been 18 years. I came out screaming, demanding attention, fighting for my first breath. Layla emerged quietly, almost apologetically, as if she already understood that our needs would always come second to appearances. We learned early that emotions were inconveniences to be managed, not feelings to be validated. When other kids had parents who kissed scraped knees and chased away nightmares, we had parents who hired nannies to deal with such trivial matters. The nannies never lasted long. My parents went through them like tissues, useful until they served their purpose, then discarded without thought. Some quit because of my parents' impossible standards. Others left because they couldn't bear to watch two little girls slowly realize that they were more burden than blessing to the people who created them. But we had each other. I remember one winter night when I was 7. Our latest nanny had quit that morning after my mother screamed at her for letting us track snow through the house. Our parents were at some charity gala, the kind where rich people pay thousands of dollars to feel good about themselves while ignoring the emotional poverty in their own homes. Layla and I were supposed to be asleep, but a thunderstorm had rolled in, and she was terrified. She crept into my room, her small body shaking under her pink nightgown. "Maya, I'm scared," she whispered, climbing into my bed. "It's just noise," I told her, wrapping my arms around her tiny frame. "It can't hurt us." "But what if the thunder breaks the house?" I pulled her closer, feeling her heart beat against my chest like a frightened bird. "Then we'll build a better one. Just you and me." That became our promise. No matter what storms came, we'd weather them together. As we got older, the emotional distance from our parents created a strange dynamic. They treated us like expensive ornaments, beautiful to display when it served their image, but easily ignored when we required actual parenting. Christmas mornings were performances. Our parents would arrange elaborate gift displays, invite their friends over to admire their perfect family, and then spend the rest of the day on their phones or at the country club. Layla and I learned to find Christmas in quiet moments, sneaking cookies in the kitchen at midnight, making snow angels when our parents weren't watching, creating our own traditions in the spaces they left empty. School wasn't much better. My parents chose our activities based on what looked good on their social media, not what we actually enjoyed. Piano lessons because it was cultured, tennis because it was networking, academic achievements because they could brag about them at dinner parties. But here's what they never understood. Their neglect didn't make us weaker. It made us unbreakable, not individually, but as a unit. Layla was a gentle one, the peacemaker who could defuse any tension with a smile or a joke. She had this way of making people feel heard, understood, valued. All the things our parents never made us feel. I was a protector, the fighter who would stand between Layla and any threat, whether it was playground bullies or our parents' latest disappointment. If someone hurt my sister, they'd have to go through me first. By high school, we developed our own language, glances that could communicate entire conversations, inside jokes that sustained us through family dinners that felt like business meetings, and an unspoken understanding that we were each other's real family. I remember junior year, when my mother decided we needed to be more socially visible. She signed us up for debutante balls, charity committees, all the activities that would photograph well for her social media empire. One evening, after a particularly brutal etiquette lesson where the instructor criticized everything from our posture to our pronunciation, Layla and I escaped to our favorite hiding spot, the old oak tree in our backyard that our parents never bothered to landscape around. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" Layla asked, her legs dangling from the branch beside mine. What would be like? Having parents who actually care, not about how we look or what we achieve, but about who we are. I was quiet for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I used to, but then I realized something. What? We do have that. We just found it in each other instead of them. Layla smiled, that radiant, genuine smile that could light up the darkest room. "Promise me something, Maya." "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how far apart life takes us, we'll always have this understanding, this bond." "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every cell in my body. Looking back now, That promise feels both prophetic and fragile. We couldn't have known then that life would test our bond in ways we never imagined. We couldn't have predicted that the very people who taught us we could only rely on each other would one day try to use that dependence against us. Our senior year brought college applications and the first real threat to our unity. I got into Berkeley for psychology. I wanted to understand how families like ours created such deep wounds. Layla chose Stanford for business. She said she wanted to build something meaningful, something that would help people rather than exploit them. The night before we left for our respective schools, we sat in our shared bedroom. Our parents had finally allowed us separate rooms junior year, but we'd never used them and made another promise. Distance doesn't change anything. I told her, "You're still my person." "And you're still mine," she replied. "Always." We maintained that closeness through college, through boyfriends and breakups, through career changes and life challenges. When Layla met Adrian during her MBA program, I was her maid of honor. When I struggled through my first year as a therapist, she was the one who talked me off the ledge. Our parents attended our major life events like distant relatives fulfilling social obligations. They smiled for photos and made appropriate comments, but there was never any real emotional investment. We'd long ago stopped expecting it, which is why, when Adrian died suddenly of a heart attack at 32, leaving Layla a wealthy widow, our parents' sudden interest in her life felt so jarring. Suddenly, they were calling daily, visiting weekly, offering unsolicited advice about investments and estate planning. For two people who'd spent our entire lives treating us like inconvenient accessories, their newfound parental concern was not just suspicious, it was terrifying. Now, standing in that cemetery with rain soaking through my coat and Layla's impossible text burning in my phone, I understood why their attention had felt so wrong. They weren't grieving parents. They were vultures who'd been circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. And somehow, Layla had figured it out before it was too late. If you grew up in a broken home, do you think it makes siblings closer or pushes them apart? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. The years after college created the first real distance between Layla and me, but not in the way our parents had hoped. They'd always assumed that separation would weaken our bond, make us more dependent on them. Instead, it taught us that love doesn't diminish with distance. It just finds new ways to express itself. I settled in San Francisco, building a small but successful therapy practice, specializing in family trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me, helping other people heal from the kind of childhood that Layla and I had survived together. Every day, I sat across from clients whose stories echoed our own, parents who provided everything except what mattered, families that looked perfect on the outside, while rotting from within. Layla chose Los Angeles, where she met Adrian Blackwood at a venture capital networking event. The first time she called me about him, I could hear something different in her voice, a lightness I hadn't heard since we were children hiding in our oak tree. "Maya, he's different," she said during one of our nightly phone calls. "When I talk, he actually listens, not just to respond, but to understand. That's called being a decent human being, Layla. The bar shouldn't be that low." She laughed, but there was something vulnerable in it. "I know, but after growing up with him, decent feels revolutionary." Adrian was everything our parents weren't. Where they were cold, he was warm. Where they were manipulative, he was genuine. Where they saw Layla as an extension of their image, he saw her as an individual worth cherishing. When they got engaged after 8 months of dating, our parents were thrilled. Not because Layla was happy, but because Adrian came from old California money. Tech fortune built over 3 generations. The kind of wealth that made our parents' real estate success look modest. I flew down for their engagement party, held at Adrian's family estate in Malibu. It was the first time I saw our parents genuinely excited about something involving their daughters, and their enthusiasm made my skin crawl. "Maya, darling, isn't this wonderful?" my mother gushed, her arm linked possessively through mine as we walked through Adrian's spectacular garden. "Finally, one of you girls has made a truly advantageous match. She's in love, Mom, not negotiating a business merger." My mother's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Oh, sweetheart, you're so naive. Love is lovely, but security is forever. Layla has chosen very wisely." That night, I found Layla on the beach behind Adrian's house, waves lapping at her bare feet as she stared out at the moonlit Pacific. Having second thoughts, I asked, settling beside her on the sand, "About Adrian?" "Never." "About them?" She gestured toward the house where our parents were networking with Adrian's family, like this was a corporate acquisition. Every second. "They're not marrying him." "You are." "I know. It's just seeing how excited they are makes me want to run away and elope in Vegas. So why don't you? She turned to me, surprise flickering across her face. You be okay with that? Layla, I'd be your maid of honor in a 24-hour chapel if that's what made you happy. This isn't about them. It's about you and Adrian. They didn't elope, but they did keep the wedding small and intimate. Our parents complained bitterly about the missed networking opportunities, but for once, Layla held firm. It was her day, her choice, her new beginning. The wedding was beautiful in its simplicity, held in Adrian's family vineyard with 50 guests who actually mattered to them, not hundreds who mattered to their parents' social climbing ambitions. When Adrian looked at Layla during their vows, I saw something I'd never witnessed before. Someone seeing my sister the way I did, as irreplaceable, precious, worthy of protection. For 2 years, Layla lived in a happiness I'd never imagined possible for either of us. She and Adrian traveled, started a small foundation supporting educational programs for underprivileged children, and began talking about starting a family of their own. Our parents maintained polite contact, but their interest waned once they realized that Adrian's wealth didn't automatically extend to them. Layla and Adrian lived modestly despite their resources, focused more on meaningful experiences than material displays. This frustrated our parents, who'd expected their daughter's marriage to elevate their own social status. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, everything changed. Adrian collapsed during his morning jog. Massive heart attack, the doctor said. A genetic condition no one knew he had. A ticking time bomb that finally went off at 32 years old. I got the call at 6 a.m. from Layla, her voice so broken I could barely understand the words. Maya, he's gone. Adrian is gone. I was on a plane to LAX within 2 hours. The next few months were a blur of funeral arrangements, legal paperwork, and watching my sister try to function while her world collapsed around her. Adrian had left everything to Layla, not just money, but properties, investments, art collections, a portfolio worth more than our parents had ever dreamed of. And that's when they came circling back. The first call came 3 days after the funeral. Sweetheart, we're so worried about you handling all this alone. My mother cooed through the phone. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? Let us help you sort through everything. Layla, still numb with grief, was almost grateful for the attention. Maybe that would be good. I can't seem to make decisions about anything. I don't think that's a good idea, I told her after she hung up. Since when do they care about helping us with anything? Maybe I'm not being fair to them. People change. Maybe losing Adrian made them realize. Layla, I took her hands, forcing her to look at me. When have they ever put your needs before their wants? Ever? But grief makes people vulnerable to hope, even false hope. Layla moved back to their house in Westchester for 2 weeks, and those 14 days changed everything. Suddenly, our parents were experts on estate management. They introduced Layla to their financial advisors, their lawyers, their accountants. They hosted dinner parties where the conversation always seemed to steer toward investments and tax shelters and the importance of diversifying assets. My father, who'd barely spoken to Layla since her wedding, was now calling himself her financial guardian angel. My mother, who'd never shown interest in anything except appearances, was suddenly concerned about Layla's emotional vulnerability, making her susceptible to predatory financial advisors. When I visited on weekends, I watched them work on her like expert manipulators. They didn't push. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they planted seeds of doubt about her ability to manage such a complex inheritance alone. They spoke of the burden of wealth and the responsibility to preserve Adrian's legacy properly. You know, sweetheart. My father said one evening over dinner, Adrian trusted you with his life's work. Don't you think he'd want professional guidance to ensure it's protected? The professionals they recommended all had one thing in common. They were willing to give our parents advisory roles in Layla's financial decisions. I tried to warn her, but grief had made her desperate for family connection, even from people who'd never provided it before. When I pushed too hard, she accused me of being jealous of her inheritance or paranoid about our parents' motives. Our first real fight in 25 years happened in their kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in May. They're using your grief against you, I said, watching her sign yet another document she hadn't read carefully. They're trying to help me, Maya. I know you've never liked them, but... Never liked them? Layla, they ignored us our entire childhood, and now they're suddenly concerned about your well-being? 3 months after you inherit millions? So, what if the timing is convenient? Maybe it took almost losing me to make them realize what family means. You didn't almost lose them. They almost lost access to your money. She slammed her hand on the counter, tears streaming down her face. Why can't you just let me have this? Why can't you let me believe that maybe, finally, I have parents who care about me? That's when I understood the real tragedy. Layla wasn't just grieving Adrian. She was grieving the childhood we never had, and our parents were exploiting that pain to get what they wanted. I backed off, but I didn't stop watching. And what I saw over the next few months terrified me. Slowly, methodically, they isolated Layla from everyone except their chosen circle of advisors. Old friends were too demanding during her time of grief. Independent financial experts were trying to take advantage of her emotional state. Even I was painted as overprotective when I asked too many questions. By winter, they convinced her to move back to Los Angeles, but into a house they'd helped her choose, managed by a property company they'd recommended, with household staff they'd personally vetted. The Layla I'd known my entire life, independent, smart, intuitive about people, was disappearing behind a fog of manufactured dependence. Every decision went through them first. Every major purchase required their approval. Every relationship was subject to their assessment. When I confronted her about it during Christmas, she'd already been so thoroughly conditioned that she defended them. They're just looking out for me, Maya. I'm not thinking clearly yet. The grief counselor they found says it's normal to need extra support during the first year. The grief counselor they found, the financial advisor they chose, the lawyers they recommended. Layla, don't you see the pattern? I see a family finally taking care of each other. That's when I knew I was losing her, not to grief, but to the same people who'd spent our entire lives teaching us we could only depend on each other. The final warning came in February, 11 months after Adrian's death. Layla called me on a Tuesday night, her voice strange and distant. Maya, I need to tell you something. I'm taking the yacht out tomorrow night. Alone. Since when do you go anywhere alone? Especially on the water? I need time to think, to make some decisions about my future, about the foundation, about everything. Something in her tone made my blood run cold. What kind of decisions? Important ones. Life-changing ones. Then let me come with you. We can talk through whatever you're thinking. No. Her voice was firm in a way I hadn't heard in months. This is something I need to do by myself. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The sister I knew didn't make impulsive decisions. She didn't seek solitude when she was struggling, and she definitely didn't go out on the ocean alone when she was contemplating life-changing decisions. I called her back 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. The next night, the yacht exploded. Do you believe money changes people for the worse, or does it reveal who they really are? Looking at my parents' sudden transformation after Layla's inheritance, I can't help but wonder if greed was always there, just waiting for the right opportunity. The official investigation into the yacht explosion was thorough, professional, and completely wrong. According to the Coast Guard report, a fuel leak had caused a catastrophic explosion around midnight. The yacht's emergency systems had malfunctioned, preventing any distress calls until it was too late. By the time rescue crews arrived, there was nothing left but debris scattered across 2 square miles of dark ocean. No body was ever recovered. The investigators explained this away with clinical detachment. The force of the explosion, the depth of the water, the strong currents that night. Bodies lost at sea weren't uncommon in accidents of this magnitude. My parents accepted this explanation with a grief that seemed almost rehearsed. They organized a funeral with military precision, choosing flowers Layla had never liked and music that meant nothing to her. When I questioned their choices, they dismissed my concerns as emotional overwhelm. Darling, you're not thinking clearly, my mother said as she selected a bronze casket for a body that didn't exist. Let us handle the arrangements. You just focus on healing. But I wasn't healing. I was remembering. I was remembering how Layla had obsessively maintained that yacht because Adrian had loved it so much. How she'd had it serviced just 2 weeks before the explosion. How she'd told me the emergency beacon was practically military grade because Adrian had been paranoid about safety after losing his father in a boating accident. I was remembering how she'd never, not once in her entire life, done anything truly impulsive. How every decision was carefully weighed, every risk carefully calculated. How the idea of her suddenly deciding to take a midnight cruise alone was as believable as her deciding to take up base jumping. Most of all, I was remembering that strange phone call, the distance in her voice, the cryptic comments about life-changing decisions. It hadn't sounded like someone planning a peaceful evening on the water. It had sounded like someone saying goodbye. But goodbye to what? Or to whom? The funeral was held on a gray October morning that matched my mood perfectly. The cemetery was full of people I didn't recognize, business associates of my parents, social contacts who'd never met Layla but felt obligated to attend. The people who'd actually mattered to her could have fit in 2 rows. I stood at the graveside, listening to a minister who'd never met my sister recite generic platitudes about eternal rest and divine plans. Every word felt like another lie piled on top of an already impossible situation. That's when my phone vibrated. At first, I ignored it. Who would be texting during a funeral? But the phone buzzed again, insistent as a heartbeat. I glanced down at the screen, expecting spam or a work emergency. Instead, I saw her name. Layla. My knees nearly buckled. The phone slipped in my rain-soaked hands as I read the message that changed everything. I'm alive. Don't trust anyone. Not even Mom and Dad. Meet me tonight at the old pier. Come alone. L. Time stopped. The minister's voice faded to white noise. The rain felt like it was falling in slow motion. Everything around me, the mourners, the flowers, the empty casket, became surreal, like a movie set designed to look like grief but lacking any emotional truth. I forced myself to look up, to scan the faces around the grave. My parents stood across from me, their expressions appropriately solemn. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I'd never seen her cry for real about anything. Did they know? Could they possibly know that their daughter was alive while they were burying an empty box? Or worse, had they always known? The funeral concluded in a blur of condolences and casseroles. People approached me with gentle touches and soft words, but all I could think about was the impossibility of that text message. Phones could be hacked. Messages could be spoofed. Dead people couldn't send texts, unless they weren't dead. I managed to get through reception at my parents' house, smiling when expected, accepting sympathy with appropriate gratitude. But every interaction felt like performance art, a carefully choreographed show hiding the earthquake happening inside my chest. Maya, you look pale, my father said, appearing beside me with a plate of food I couldn't imagine eating. You need to keep your strength up. I'm fine, Dad. Are you sure? This has been such a trauma for all of us. Maybe you should talk to someone professional. I know a wonderful therapist who specializes in grief counseling. Another expert they'd found. Another professional they'd carefully chosen. The pattern that had ensnared Layla was already starting to wrap around me. I said I'm fine. By 7 o'clock, I'd made my excuses and escaped to my hotel. I had 3 hours before the meeting at the pier. 3 hours to decide if I was losing my mind or if my sister had somehow faked her own death. The old pier was a place from our childhood, a forgotten dock at the edge of a small lake about 20 miles from town. Our parents had taken us there exactly once, for a 4th of July barbecue when we were 8. They'd spent the entire day networking with other families, while Layla and I explored the weathered planks and rusty railings. It became our secret place after that. Whenever family life became unbearable, we'd ride our bikes to the lake and sit on the pier, feet dangling in the water, dreaming about the lives we'd build when we were old enough to escape. If someone wanted to choose a location that only Layla would know was meaningful to me, they'd chosen perfectly. I arrived at 10:45 p.m., my headlights cutting through the darkness as I pulled into the empty parking area. The pier stretched into black water like a pointing finger. At the end of it, I could see a figure waiting. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it over the sound of my footsteps on the wooden planks. As I got closer, the figure turned, and in the moonlight, I saw a face I'd been mourning for 3 days. Layla, alive, real, terrified. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, darker, and she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. But her eyes were the same, and when she saw me, they filled with the same tears that were streaming down my face. Maya. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only stand there, staring at my supposedly dead sister, trying to reconcile the impossible reality in front of me with the grief I'd been carrying for 3 days. How? I finally managed to ask. It's complicated, and it's dangerous. Maya, everything we thought we knew about them is wrong. They're not just greedy, they're killers. The word hit me like a physical blow. What? The explosion wasn't an accident. It was meant to kill me. They tried to murder me, Maya. Our own parents tried to have me killed. Imagine being told your loved one was dead, only to find out they might be alive. Would you chase the truth or accept the loss? Standing on that pier, looking at my supposedly dead sister, I had to choose between sanity and hope. Sitting on that moonlit pier with my supposedly dead sister, I felt reality fracture around me like ice breaking under pressure. Every certainty I'd held for the past 3 days, grief, loss, the finality of death, crumbled as Layla told me a story that sounded like madness but felt like truth. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell me everything. Layla pulled her jacket tighter against the lake breeze. Remember how I called you that Tuesday night? How I said I was taking the yacht out to make important decisions? You sounded strange, distant, because I'd figured it out. Finally, after months of them controlling every aspect of my life, I started to see the pattern. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folder of documents, her hands shaking as she spread them across the weathered pier planks. Look at this, she said, pointing to a life insurance policy I'd never seen before. They convinced me to increase my coverage 6 months ago. $25 million, Maya. They said it was for estate planning purposes. The beneficiaries listed weren't what I expected. Instead of charitable organizations or family trusts, I saw names I didn't recognize. Holding companies, investment firms, offshore accounts. I don't understand, I said. Why would you make these people your beneficiaries? I didn't. At least, I didn't know I was. Look at the signature dates. My blood turned cold as I studied the papers. Every document had been signed during the period when Layla was staying at our parents' house, lost in grief and grateful for their sudden attention. They told me these were temporary documents, she continued, placeholder policies, until I was emotionally ready to make permanent decisions. But look at the fine print. There's nothing temporary about them. I studied the legal language, my therapy background helping me recognize manipulation tactics, even in written form. They got you to sign over your entire estate, while you thought you were just handling paperwork. It gets worse. She pulled out bank statements showing transfers I'd never heard about. They convinced me to diversify my assets by moving money into safer investments. Except these investments were actually loans to companies they owned. The numbers were staggering. Over 8 months, they'd maneuvered nearly $15 million of Layla's inheritance into their control, all under the guise of protecting her emotional and financial well-being. But why fake your death? I asked if they already had access to the money, because I was starting to ask questions. The grief was lifting, and I was beginning to see how they manipulated everything. I'd scheduled meetings with independent financial advisors, started requesting detailed reports on all my investments. She showed me emails dated just days before the explosion, correspondence with forensic accountants who specialized in financial elder abuse. Layla had been preparing to reclaim control of her inheritance and possibly press charges. That Tuesday night when I called you, I just discovered the insurance policy. I realized they weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to kill me for it. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Our parents, the people who'd given us life, had planned to take Layla's for money. So what happened on the yacht? I didn't go alone. I hired private security, a former Navy SEAL named Marcus Torres. I told him I suspected someone might try to hurt me, but I didn't tell him it was my own parents. She pulled up photos on her phone, showing a man in his 40s with kind eyes and military bearing. Marcus insisted on checking the yacht before we left dock. He found the explosive device within 10 minutes, professionally installed, remotely triggered, designed to look like a fuel system malfunction. My hands were shaking as I processed this information. They hired someone to blow up your yacht, not someone random. Look at this. She showed me bank records from one of our father's business accounts. A payment of $50,000 to something called Marine Safety Consulting 3 weeks before the explosion. I had Marcus trace the company. It's a front for a man named Vincent Carrera, former military, now specializes in maritime accidents for people who can afford his services. The methodical nature of their plan was what terrified me most. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of greed-driven madness. They'd spent months systematically stealing Layla's inheritance while simultaneously planning her murder. How did you escape? Marcus and I disabled the device and moved it to an unmanned boat we'd rented under false names. We sailed the yacht to a predetermined location, transferred to the rental boat, and then triggered the explosion remotely. But the Coast Guard investigation found exactly what they expected to find. Debris from a yacht explosion. No bodies, no survivors. Marcus had contacts who helped obscure some of the forensic evidence that might have revealed the truth. I stared at my sister, alive, brilliant, and 3 steps ahead of parents who'd underestimated her their entire lives. Where have you been for 3 days? Safe house. Marcus has connections with people who help domestic abuse victims disappear when their lives are in danger. Apparently, financial abuse that escalates to attempted murder qualifies. The pieces were falling into place, but one thing still bothered me. Why contact me now? Why not just stay hidden? Layla's expression darkened. Because they're not done. Look at this. She showed me text messages from our mother, sent to her supposedly dead daughter's phone just hours after the funeral. Maya's asking too many questions. She's becoming a problem. We need to handle this before she discovers anything. The grief counselor you recommended is standing by. A few sessions should help her accept the accident. My stomach dropped as I understood the implication. They're planning to get rid of me too. Not kill you, at least not yet, but they want to isolate you the same way they isolated me. Get you dependent on their chosen therapist. Convince you that grief is making you paranoid. Slowly separate you from anyone who might support your instincts. The pattern was becoming clear. They perfected their manipulation techniques on Layla, and now they were preparing to use them on me, the only person who might uncover their crimes. What do? We gather evidence. Real evidence that will hold up in court and put them in prison where they belong. Over the next hour, Layla outlined a plan that was both terrifying and necessary. Using her supposed death as cover, we would document their crimes systematically. The financial fraud, the insurance scam, the attempted murder, and whatever other schemes they've been running. Marcus has been monitoring their communications since the explosion, she explained. They think they're safe, so they're not being careful about covering their tracks. She showed me recordings of phone conversations between our parents and their criminal contacts, discussions about disposing of problematic evidence, plans for accessing Layla's accounts now that she was gone, and most chilling of all, strategies for managing my emotional instability if I became too suspicious. They're meeting with Vincent Carrera tomorrow night, Layla said. Final payment for the job, plus discussing future services if needed. Future services? In case I survive somehow. In case you become too much of a threat. In case anyone else starts asking inconvenient questions. The casual way our parents discussed potential murders was perhaps the most horrifying revelation of all. This wasn't desperation or momentary madness. It was business. We record that meeting, I said, surprising myself with my determination. We get them on tape admitting to attempted murder. Maya, it's dangerous. If they suspect anything, then we'd better not get caught. The next evening, I played the role of grieving sister while secretly wearing recording equipment Marcus had provided. The technology was nearly invisible. A device smaller than a button hidden in my jewelry, another sewn into the lining of my purse. I arrived at my parents' house for what they thought was a family dinner. In reality, it was their final planning meeting before collecting Layla's insurance payout. Maya, sweetheart, you look better, my mother said, embracing me with arms that had never felt more like a trap. The fresh air must be helping. I'm trying to move forward, I said, hating how easy the lies came. Focus on positive memories instead of dwelling on the tragedy. That's very healthy, my father added, his approval feeling like poison. Layla wouldn't want you to waste your life mourning her. The conversation felt surreal, discussing my supposedly dead sister with the people who tried to kill her. But I maintained my composure, played my part, and waited for Vincent Carrera to arrive. He showed up at 8 o'clock sharp, a lean man in his 50s with dead eyes and hands that looked capable of violence. My parents introduced him as a family friend who would help with some difficult business arrangements. The marina situation has been resolved, he told them. Speaking in code they all understood. No complications. Clean work. And the follow-up concerns we discussed? My father asked, standing by if needed, though I doubt it will be necessary. These things usually resolve themselves naturally once the initial shock passes. They were talking about killing me, sitting in my childhood home, eating my mother's carefully prepared dinner, discussing my potential murder like it was a business decision. I excused myself to use the bathroom and sent a quick text to Layla. They're planning something. Be ready. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to logistics. Insurance paperwork that needed to be filed, legal proceedings that had to be navigated, timelines for accessing various accounts. $25 million is a lot of money, my mother said, her voice filled with an excitement she couldn't quite hide. We'll need to be smart about how we handle it. The beauty of the offshore structures we established is that the money will be completely clean, my father added. No connection to us, no tax implications, no suspicious transactions. Vincent Carrera nodded approvingly. I've worked with your financial people before. They know how to make money disappear and reappear where it's needed. That's when I realized the full scope of their criminal enterprise. This wasn't their first murder for hire. They'd done this before, perfected the system, built a network of accomplices who specialize in making wealthy people disappear. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Police are in position. Keep them talking for 5 more minutes. I've been thinking, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound vulnerable. Maybe I should get some professional help. The grief is overwhelming sometimes. My parents exchanged a glance I now understood perfectly. What a wonderful idea, my mother said. We know an excellent therapist who specializes in trauma recovery, Dr. Sarah Weinstock. She's helped several families through similar tragedies. Similar tragedies? Vincent repeated with what might have been amusement. Yes, she's very experienced with unique situations. They were already planning my psychological destruction, preparing to gaslight me into accepting a narrative that would keep their secret safe. But their confidence was their downfall. They'd grown so comfortable with their crimes, so assured of their control, that they'd forgotten the first rule of murder. Never celebrate until you're certain your victim is really dead. The other issue we discussed, my father said to Vincent, about potential complications from Maya's emotional state. How quickly could that be addressed if necessary? 48 hours. But like I said, it probably won't come to that. The grief will do most of the work for us. That's when the front door exploded inward and armed FBI agents flooded the dining room. Nobody moved, hands where we can see them. The expression on my parents' faces was almost worth the months of terror they'd put us through. Shock, confusion, and then a dawning understanding that their perfect crime had unraveled. Vincent Carrera tried to run, but made it exactly 3 steps before being tackled by agents who'd been surrounding the house for hours. As they were reading my parents their rights, I felt a presence behind me and turned to see Layla standing in the doorway, very much alive and accompanied by federal agents who'd been building a case against our parents' criminal network for months. Maya Chun and Layla Blackwood, the lead agent, said, "Thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your evidence has helped us shut down one of the most sophisticated murder-for-hire operations we've ever encountered. Our parents weren't just greedy. They were serial killers who've been murdering wealthy targets for years, using their real estate connections to identify victims and their financial networks to launder profits. And we just helped bring down their entire operation. What's worse, betrayal from strangers or betrayal from family? Watching my parents get arrested for trying to murder their own daughter, I realized that some betrayals cut so deep they change who you are forever. The trial of Richard and Susan Chin began 6 months later in a federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. The media had dubbed it the family murder plot, and for weeks, our story dominated headlines across the country. I sat in the gallery every day, watching as prosecutors methodically destroyed the carefully constructed lies my parents had built their lives around. Evidence of their crimes filled bankers' boxes. Financial records, recorded conversations, testimonies from other victims who'd survived similar schemes. Because there had been others. Many others. The FBI investigation had uncovered at least 7 suspicious deaths over the past decade, all wealthy individuals who died in accidents shortly after my parents had helped them with estate planning or investment strategies. A socialite who'd fallen downstairs in her Malibu mansion. A tech executive whose car had inexplicably crashed on a straight highway. A retired judge who'd suffered a fatal heart attack despite being in perfect health. Each death had been ruled accidental or natural. Each victim had signed over significant assets to offshore accounts my parents controlled. And each case had been handled by the same network of corrupt officials, complicit investigators, and criminal specialists. Vincent Carrera had been their primary enforcer, a man who could make murder look like misfortune with terrifying consistency. Under interrogation, he'd revealed details that made my skin crawl. How he'd studied each victim's routines, identified their vulnerabilities, planned their deaths with the precision of a military operation. Your parents weren't just criminals. The prosecutor had explained to me during trial preparation. They were running what amounts to a serial killing enterprise, targeting wealthy, isolated individuals and harvesting their estates like crops. Layla and I were the prosecution's star witnesses, but testify against our own parents felt like stepping into an alternate reality where everything I believed about family loyalty had been inverted. On the day of my testimony, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, my hands shaking as I placed them on the Bible to swear my oath to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me, swearing to honesty in front of people who built their entire relationship with me on lies. "Miss Chun," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your parents?" I looked across the courtroom at Richard and Susan Chun, the people who'd given me life, and then tried to take my sisters. They sat at the defense table in expensive suits, their lawyers whispering urgently in their ears, their faces masks of false dignity. I thought I knew them, I said, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. I thought they were emotionally distant, but ultimately harmless. I was wrong about everything. When did you first suspect that something wasn't right about your sister's yacht explosion? From the moment I heard about it. Layla never did anything impulsive, especially on the water. The idea that she'd take a yacht out alone at midnight was completely out of character. But your parents accepted the official explanation? More than accepted it. They embraced it. They planned her funeral before her body was even searched for. They seemed almost relieved. The defense attorney objected, but the judge allowed my observation to stand. For 3 hours, I recounted everything. The systematic financial manipulation, the suspicious insurance policies, the network of criminal contacts, the recorded conversations where they discussed potential future murders. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine me, they tried to paint me as a grief-stricken daughter whose paranoia had created conspiracy where none existed. Miss Chun, isn't it possible that your parents' sudden attention to your sister was genuine concern for her well-being? No, I said firmly, because if they genuinely cared about her well-being, they wouldn't have tried to blow her up. Objection. Sustained. The jury will disregard. But the damage was done. The truth had a way of cutting through legal technicalities. The most dramatic moment came when Layla took the stand. The defense had built their entire case around the premise that she was actually dead, that the woman claiming to be Layla Blackwood was an imposter I'd hired to support my delusions. It was a desperate strategy that collapsed the moment she began speaking. My name is Layla Chin Blackwood, she said, her voice clear and strong. I am the daughter of Richard and Susan Chun, and they tried to murder me for my inheritance. She testified about the years of emotional manipulation, the systematic theft of her assets, the discovery of the insurance policy that revealed their true intentions. When I realized what they were planning, she said, I felt like my entire life had been a lie. These people who brought me into the world were willing to take me out of it for money. How did that make you feel? Terrified, but also strangely relieved. Finally, I understood why I'd never felt loved by them. It's hard to love someone you're planning to kill. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that she'd faked her own death to frame innocent parents, Layla's response was devastating. Sir, if I wanted to disappear with millions of dollars, I wouldn't have involved the FBI. I wouldn't have spent months gathering evidence of their crimes. I wouldn't be sitting here, testifying in open court, if my goal was to steal money. Then why fake your death at all? Because they were going to kill me and I wanted to live. The simplicity of that answer, the fundamental human desire for survival, seemed to reach every person in that courtroom. The defense's case crumbled further when Vincent Carrera agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony was clinical, matter-of-fact, and absolutely damning. Richard and Susan Chin hired me to eliminate their daughter, he said without emotion. They provided detailed information about her routines, her boat, her security measures. They paid me $50,000 up front, with another $100,000 promised upon completion. Did they express any hesitation about killing their own child? None whatsoever. Mrs. Chun was particularly insistent that the death appear accidental. She was concerned about maintaining their social standing in the community. My mother's face remained impassive during this testimony, but I saw my father close his eyes as if he could make the truth disappear through sheer will. Have you performed similar services for defendants before? Multiple times over the past decade. They were among my most reliable clients. The prosecution played recordings of phone calls between my parents and their criminal network, conversations about money laundering, victim selection, and body disposal methods. In one particularly chilling exchange, my mother discussed the efficiency of Vincent's work and recommended him to another potential client. These weren't crimes of passion or momentary greed. They were business transactions conducted by people who turned murder into profit with cold, calculating precision. When the verdict was read 6 weeks later, I felt something between relief and emptiness. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and 7 counts of first-degree murder for the other victims they'd killed over the years. Life sentences without possibility of parole. As the judge read their sentences, my parents finally showed emotion. My mother began sobbing, not from remorse, but from the apparent shock that their carefully constructed world had collapsed. My father stared straight ahead, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. They were led away in shackles, and I realized I was watching the end of one story and the beginning of another, Justice had been served, but the real work of healing was just beginning. 6 months after the trial ended, Layla and I sat in the same spot where our story had truly begun. On the old pier where she'd revealed she was alive, where we'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. The lake looked different in spring sunlight, peaceful instead of ominous. The weathered planks beneath our feet held new memories now, not just childhood dreams and desperate midnight revelations, but the weight of survival and the possibility of genuine healing. Do you ever regret it? Layla asked, her feet dangling in the water like when we were children, testifying against them, destroying whatever was left of our family. I considered the question carefully. In the months since their conviction, I'd felt many things: relief, grief, anger, confusion, but never regret. They destroyed our family long before we exposed them. I said, we just finally stopped pretending it existed. The aftermath of the trial had been surreal. Media attention that painted us as either heroic survivors or ungrateful daughters, depending on the outlet. Legal proceedings to recover the stolen assets and distribute them according to Adrian's actual wishes. Therapy sessions to process decades of manipulation and the trauma of discovering your parents are serial killers. But perhaps the strangest part was the silence where their presence used to be. For 30 years, Richard and Susan Chun had been a constant source of disappointment, criticism, and emotional withholding. Their absence should have felt like freedom. But instead, it felt like stepping into a void we didn't know how to fill. I keep waiting to feel sad about them being in prison, Layla said. Isn't that what normal daughters would feel? I don't think we get to be normal daughters anymore. And maybe that's okay. The financial recovery had been overwhelming. Layla's inheritance was restored, plus assets recovered from their other victims' estates. But money felt different now. Not like security or power, but like responsibility. I've been thinking about the foundation, Layla said, expanding it beyond education programs. What did you have in mind? Support for people escaping financial abuse. Legal resources for victims whose families are exploiting them. Safe houses for people whose relatives pose actual threats to their safety. It was perfect, using our experience to help others navigate similar nightmares, turning our trauma into something that could prevent other families from being destroyed by greed and manipulation. Adrian would love that, I said. He always said money should solve problems, not create them. We'd established new traditions in the space our parents had left empty. Weekly dinners where we actually talked to each other instead of performing for an audience. Holidays focus on gratitude instead of appearances. Relationships built on honesty instead of obligation. Marcus Torres had become an unexpected friend, helping us navigate the complex world of personal security and financial protection. Vincent Carrera's revelations during the trial had exposed an entire network of criminals who targeted wealthy, isolated individuals, and we'd learned that survival required more than just vigilance. It required community. I have something to tell you, Layla said, her voice carrying a nervous excitement I hadn't heard in years. Good news or bad news? Good news. Great news, actually. She turned to face me, her eyes bright with possibility. I'm seeing someone. My heart skipped with protective instinct. Who? How? When? She laughed. The genuine, unguarded sound I'd missed during all those months when grief and manipulation had dimmed her spirit. His name is David. He's a victim rights advocate who worked with the FBI during our case. He helped coordinate support services for the other families affected by Mom and Dad's business. And he asked me out 6 times before I realized he wasn't working an angle. Apparently, some people actually like spending time with me without ulterior motives. The wonder in her voice broke my heart and mended it simultaneously. After everything she'd endured, Adrian's death, our parents' betrayal, months of hiding and fear, she was still capable of hope, still open to love. Are you happy? I asked. Getting there, she said. For the first time in 2 years, I'm getting there. That night, driving home to the California hills, I thought about the question Layla had asked me. Did I regret exposing our parents? The answer was complex. I regretted that we'd had to make that choice. I regretted that they'd chosen money over their daughters' lives. I regretted the childhood we'd never had and the family we'd never been. But I didn't regret choosing truth over comfortable lies. I didn't regret choosing Layla's life over their secrets. And I didn't regret learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the people who raised you are not the people you thought they were. In my therapy practice, I'd started specializing in helping clients navigate family trauma and financial abuse. Every day, I sat across from people whose stories echoed our own, Families that look perfect on the outside while causing devastating harm behind closed doors. The work was difficult but meaningful. Helping someone recognize manipulation patterns, supporting them as they set boundaries with toxic relatives, watching them build healthier relationships. It felt like turning our nightmare into something purposeful. Sometimes clients asked how I'd found the strength to testify against my own parents. The answer was always the same. I didn't do it alone. Layla and I had survived our childhood by protecting each other. We'd survived our parents' crimes the same way. And we were building our future on the same foundation. The unshakable knowledge that blood doesn't determine family, love does. Engagement question number 5. If your parents betrayed you for money, would you forgive them or cut ties forever? For us, forgiveness isn't about what they deserve. It's about what we need to heal. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. I know it's been a journey. Through childhood trauma, financial manipulation, attempted murder, and ultimately justice and healing. But this isn't just my story. It's a story about recognizing when family relationships are toxic, about finding the courage to choose truth over comfort, and about discovering that the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're born into. Every week, I hear from people who are living their own versions of this nightmare. Family members who exploit their grief, relatives who see inheritance as opportunity, parents who prioritize money over their children's well-being. If that's your story, please know that you're not alone. There are resources, advocates, and legal protections available. You don't have to suffer in silence, and you don't have to face manipulation and abuse just because it comes from family. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own safety? How do you handle relationships with people who claim to love you but consistently harm you? And if this story resonated with you, if it helped you feel less alone or gave you courage to face your own difficult family dynamics, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know they're not crazy, they're not alone, and their survival matters more than anyone else's comfort. Your story matters too, and I'd love to hear it.